Welcome to Chandwell. My name's Michael and I'm partway through building this model of Bradford Cathedral from paper and card. I'm about halfway through making the tower and I thought I'd make this video to show you the techniques I'm using, the approach I'm taking and some of the challenges I've encountered, particularly around the tracery on the beautiful west window. When I made the mock-up from Serial Packet, I made the tower from 4 tall sides. When it came to making the real thing, I decided to take a different approach. There are thin string courses which band the tower at various heights, and they progress right around the buttresses. I usually make this kind of banding out of very thin strips of Weetabix packet, but I thought it would be too much of a challenge to get it neatly wrapped around the buttresses. I thought I could make each section its own box, with slightly larger lids on top to represent the string courses, poking out just 0.5 millimeter or so. So, I'm going for a tower made up of box sections, each one a strong construction in its own right, with pieces of buttress being added as I ascend. I started by making a box for the bottom. This is mainly the base of the model and a small piece of wall that is visible at ground level. I used triangular fillets to keep it square, and each wall is 2 layers of 1mm card thick, so it's strong and sturdy. The buttresses are stacks of card in various thicknesses to get them to the right proportion. They will stick onto the corners of the box like this, and then the lid that represents the string courses will go on top of that. I use PVA glue to hold the buttress in place, and use my hook tool to scrape away any glue that splurged out. It's important that it lines up along the top of the component, so I turn it upside down and press the buttress into place. With those on, I use PVA again along the top and press it into the string course lid. You can see that it sticks out just 0.5 millimeter all the way around. The next layer is very thin. It's a rectangle only 2¼ millimeters tall. It will go on top like this, and then its lid on top of that. I used a printed paper wrap for the first 2 string courses, but on reflection it looks a little bit scruffy, so I decided for the next set I would just paint the card. I used 4 layers of 0.5 millimeter card to make the recessed door in the same way that I made the recessed windows in the nave. A further piece of 0.5 millimeter card went behind that to represent the edge that goes around the door on the real cathedral. I took care to keep the textures aligned so that it looks like it is made from the same building material in one solid piece. After some thought about the doors, I decided to just print 2 photographs of them. I tried to cut away the recessed wooden panels to leave me with just the wooden frame pieces. I didn't do the best of jobs, but the thinner bars here are just 0.8 millimeter wide. The idea is that it will stick on top of this one to give it some 3D relief. With the white paper edges painted with watercolour and then all stuck into place, it's actually worked out quite nicely. It's subtle but visible. And it will go onto the tower next. The doorway's box was complete, and you can see that the door is just stuck into place behind its aperture, and you can see the various layers of card that make up the wall to achieve the beveled recess. This one's string course does not go around the buttresses, so it just sticks out across the front part. It's important when making boxes like this to fully understand the thickness of your materials. I use the free drawing software Inkscape to help me work this out. I know from experience that a sheet of my 0.5 millimeter card with a layer of sticky label on top is 0.6 millimeters thick. So 5 layers across the front of the box makes the whole wall 3 millimeters thick, and so these walls are sized to the appropriate length. The giant west window was drawn in Inkscape, and I showed this in a video a few months ago. This was my first attempt when doing the mock-up. I checked this against a photograph of the real thing, and I realised that it was a little too tall and thin. It didn't take much work to pull it into the correct proportions. I used Inkscape's offset feature to help me create 5 versions of the window. Each one has tracery thinner than the one before. The smaller uprights vanished at this point, and I was left with bars just 0.6 millimeters wide. I printed these to card and set about cutting them out. I'm sometimes asked how long it takes me to cut out components like this. Well, let's take a look. Here I am cutting out the 3rd of the 5 window pieces. I start by cutting the vertical lines. I always keep my ruler on top of the piece that I want to keep. This prevents accidental damage and ensures that any natural inaccuracy that I have in my eyesight or technique remains in the same place across the whole model. I work carefully and slowly. I use very gentle strokes. With my sharp knife and thin card, it takes 2 strokes to get through. With the small ones done, I do the longer ones. After about 3 minutes of that, I rotate 180 degrees and do the next set of lines. Again, I use the same technique, short light strokes and with the ruler on top of the parts that I want to keep. With the vertical lines done, I rotate 90 degrees and now start on the tiny parts at the top of the window. These are really small. The smallest one is just 1.8 by 3.3 millimeters. So I do them by hand, no ruler. I use a kind of jabbing motion with my scalpel and essentially saw and poke the piece out. It comes away nicely and I continue my way along the top of the window. It's very satisfying to see the shape of the window start to emerge as I work. 8 minutes in and I have the top row done. There are no straight lines on the next row, so this is all done by hand too. I use the same technique as before. Notice that I rotate the piece of card and keep my scalpel in about the same position. This keeps my hand comfortable and ensures that I'm not trying to do weird movements that would result in bodily injury, or worse, a miscut on the card. After 12.5 minutes, the ruler comes back and I cut the horizontal parts of the bottom of the window. Because the bars are so thin, I don't drag my scalpel right into the corners of the windows. I don't want to accidentally cut away the bar. So I go over freehand later to accurately cut into the corners. This is a good technique, which is more time consuming, but definitely prevents any accidents. It seems I forgot to do these vertical cuts earlier, so I'll do them now. And then I cut the arched tops freehand as before. I love the feeling of seeing them pop out and sometimes fly away. There we go. 15 minutes and 34 seconds of cutting. This really is my zen place. Of all the things that I do in my modelling, cutting out card like this is by far my favourite. It's like a kind of zen meditation, got nothing else to think of, and it's a beautiful way to calm myself down before or after work. So no, I don't want to use a laser cutter or a Cricut machine or anything like that. This really is my favourite part of this hobby. Anyway, enough of that. Here's the third of the 5 pieces ready for the model. It goes on top of the first 2 like this. The steadily decreasing tracery width is again subtle, but it's definitely there and noticeable. With them all cut, I decided that 5 layers was a little too much, so I threw away number 4. They go on top of each other like this, and then the main window reveal goes on top of that. Here they are, all stuck together. It's more time consuming than just cutting the window in one piece, but gosh, the effect looks good. It really does look like the tracery is beveled. I'm really pleased with the result. I stick the scale scenes texture to the wall, and then freehand cut slits down and across the piece that goes across the window aperture. I use PVA glue on the back, and then use my scribe tool to tightly fold and wrap the paper around the edge. I cut the arched part into strips, and then fold these as tightly as I can. Once done, the arch looks good. I don't need to make the texture include specifically shaped stones. This looks good enough and the shape really is pleasing to the eye. Looking good. I use stone coloured acrylic paint to cover the tracery, and then I drop the wall into place onto the PVA glue. The west window is beautiful stained glass. How should I represent that on the model? Whenever you are outside a church in daylight, stained glass looks at best very, very dark, and at worst, it just looks black. I decided that I'd make it look natural and go for the dark. I did want to get a hint of the light casting highlights on the leaded parts of the stained glass, and I thought for a long while how to do that. I started with a photo of the real window from the inside, flipped to make it the right way around for the outside. I took the shape of the window and added a graduated fill from dark blue to darker blue, diagonally, top to bottom. I dropped this on top of the photograph with a slight transparency so that most of the window detail was lost. After that, I used Inkscape's bitmap trace feature to trace only the darkest parts of the original photo. The result was a bit of a mess at close inspection, but when coloured a light blue and then dropped on top of the dark window, that's the exact look I was after. With that printed out, the component went on top, into some dots of PVA glue, and it'll be varnished with gloss later on. I added PVA glue to the nave and dropped the window box onto the model. I was really pleased to see that it lined up nicely with the parts of the buttress that were built into the nave. I'm continuing to work my way up the tower. I've already got the clock in place, and it's the louvres next, which contains the bells, and then the top with the spires on top. Should have a video of that in the next few weeks, and we'll also see the return of Maggie Myers, the cathedral's Director of Education and Visitors, who's going to tell us many fascinating stories and history about this magnificent tower. If you'd like a reminder of how I built the nave, then there's a video here that you can go and enjoy. So until then, thank you for watching this episode. Take care, and I'll see you then.